Hi, I'm Naj Modak.
And I'm Sarah Beasley. Welcome to the Humber Estuary.
We're here at the Humber Bridge, which spans one of Europe's largest estuaries. Around 20% of England's surface water flows into the Humber. Many rivers flow into the Humber, with the largest being the Aire, the Derwent, the Don, the Ouse, the Trent and the Wharfe.
The Humber Bridge was opened in 1981. It spans over 1,400 metres, and at the time of being built, it was the longest single-span suspension bridge in the world. Today, it remains the longest in the UK.
Around 150,000 birds visit the estuary during the wintering period, making it one of the most important sites in Europe for wildfowl. These birds come to feed on the rich sources of food found in the mud when the tide is out.
The estuary is also a very important area for the UK's economy. It is home to the biggest ports complex in the country. 25% of the country's oil refining capacity is here. It produces as much power as Drax in Selby, Europe's largest power station. Major chemical, food processing and healthcare industries are all based here, and it is emerging as a centre for renewable energy.
It's amazing how people don't realise how important the Humber Estuary is to all of us in the UK. In this series, we're going to discover how vital the river and the surrounding coastline is to our economy, the natural world and our culture. And hopefully, you'll discover something fascinating along the way.
Over the coming weeks, we'll be visiting lots of places around the Humber Estuary, from Spurn Point at the mouth of the estuary, around our wonderful waterways to Donanook in northern Lincolnshire.
So make sure you join us to discover more about where you live and the attractions you can visit and enjoy.
We hope to inspire you to find out more. Visit places on your doorstep, maybe even get involved in some of the things that are going on.
Later, I'll be heading over to the Far Ings Nature Reserve for my very first visit to learn how our industrial heritage has helped wildlife for over a century.
And I'll be taking a short drive over to Alkborough Flats to find out how industry is working with nature today.
But first, we start our journey by speaking to Gordon Kell of the Humber Management Scheme to see how efforts are being made to look after the conservation of the Humber Estuary. So then, Gordon, what is the Humber Management Scheme?
Yeah, the Humber Management Scheme is designed to look after the conservation of the Humber Estuary. The Humber Estuary is a European marine site, and it stretches from Donanook right up to where the Ouse and the Trent meet the Humber. And the Humber Estuary is an area of special conservation, and we're responsible for ensuring that it's kept in favourable condition.
So what is your involvement in the scheme? What is your actual role?
I, along with a colleague, manage the Humber Management Scheme, and we ensure that all its natural habitats and its wildlife are protected, and we have responsibility to do that in partnership with over 30 partners.
Why do you feel it's important?
Well, throughout the world, the natural habitat is being lost all the time, and many people who live in this area don't realise what a wonderful natural environment the Humber Estuary is. So we've got important reed beds, we've got important what we call intertidal areas where the tide comes in and covers what people would think of as being mud, great feeding grounds for birds. We've got the grey seals that are at Donanook. We've got important birds like the bittern and the marsh harrier, the avocet, and also we've got an extraordinary fish called the lamprey, which lives in, or rather migrates up and down the estuary, river lamprey and sea lamprey. Fascinating creatures. And it's our responsibility to ensure that they're protected, not only for our own generation, but for future generations.
What do you see for the future of the scheme?
I think now we're working so successfully, particularly with economic development partners, developers who are coming to the estuary. It's very important economically the estuary, and we've got to harmonise the natural environment with the economic development situation, and that's vital. And now that we've got the right partnerships in place, I'm very optimistic about the future for the estuary and how people can begin to understand it and benefit from the quality of life that it gives.
Thank you very much for that, Gordon.
Thanks, Nigel. Good to see you.
A perfect example of how the Humber Management Scheme is working to preserve natural environments can be found a short walk away on the Barton foreshore at the Water's Edge Visitor Centre. Water's Edge was completed in 2006 and can be seen clearly from the Humber Bridge. It's part of the UK's Earth Centre network, which means it was built with sustainability in mind. It has solar voltaics to generate electricity, a water recycling system which includes rainwater capture and grey water recycling using the reed beds. You'll also notice a lot of recycled materials in the fabric of the building too. There's a number of walks you can follow here, suitable for both families with toddlers and the more serious walker amongst you. There's a host of habitats to explore too, from freshwater lakes to rare salt marsh, even mudflats. I'm speaking to Humber Inca manager Darren Clark about the Humber Nature Partnership. So, Darren, can you tell me a little bit about the Humber Nature Partnership?
Yes, the Humber Nature Partnership brings together two existing organisations which have been operating on the Humber for around about 10 years. Those two organisations are Humber Inca, which stands for Humber Industry Nature Conservation Association, and the Humber Management Scheme. Humber Inca works with businesses on the estuary, helping them out with wildlife on and around their sites. And the Humber Management Scheme works with a lot of the organisations who have some sort of regulatory control on the estuary. So includes statutory government organisations and local authorities.
Why did you decide to do this?
Well, nature partnerships are being set up right the way around the country as part of a government initiative. On the Humber, there's a massive challenge trying to balance the current pressures for economic development on the estuary and the estuary's nature conservation interest. The Nature Partnership brings together two organisations which has those focus, and so it just makes sense on the estuary.
Could you tell me who else is involved in this initiative?
So there's a lot of businesses involved, from ports and logistics companies, power generating companies, chemical producing companies, local authorities, government organisations like Natural England and the Environment Agency, as well as conservation bodies like the RSPB and the Lincolnshire and Yorkshire Wildlife Trusts.
So can anyone get involved with this?
Absolutely, yes. We've established something called the Humber Nature Forum, which meets regularly to talk about hot topics on the estuary and to try and develop projects to solve any problems that there might be.
Great, well thanks for talking to me today, Darren. Join us after the break as Naj pays a visit to Farring's Nature Reserve, and I'll be headed out to Altborough Flats to see how industry is working with nature today.
Ings is the Old English word for the wet pastures west of Barton. Since the Roman times, people have been using the underlying clay to make bricks and tiles. The interplay between nature and human activity is nothing new in the Humber. As far back as we can go in history, the people have been using the landscape for industry and commerce, which all impacts on the natural world. But here at Far Ings, industrial activity has had an interesting effect. I'm here to meet Emma Wilmot, Senior Education and Community Officer here. The history behind how Far Ings came into existence is quite interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Yes, I mean this whole site originally was actually an industrial site. On site here was actually a brick and tile works, so there were large kilns where they actually use that really good quality clay for making pan tiles and bricks, the pan tiles you may see on a lot of the roofs around this area. And basically, after the height of the brick and tile making industry died off back in the late 1800s, through into the 20th century, things wound down and the pits were abandoned into the 1950s. And it rained, and clay bottom pits, they fill with water, and eventually the wildlife found its way here.
Has the habitat brought any new species that weren't here before?
Well, actually, what has been one of the biggest monumental moments in the Wildlife Trust's involvement with the site was in the year 2000, in the early springtime. We heard a bittern booming here for the first time in over 21 years. And bitterns had been declining for hundreds of years across the country, and they were only based basically in the Norfolk Broads, and now they're expanding the territory. So 2000 we had the first bittern booming back here after a long absence, which was a real landmark for the Wildlife Trust and the management of the site.
And what kind of birds can people expect to see here?
And because of the freshwater pits that we have all sorts of different waterfowl. So at any time you can see mallards, geese, you'll be able to see tufted ducks, pochard, various different ones through the summer. We have a lot of woodland birds, but also it can be quite seasonal, so we have different variations during different seasons as well. And
what can people see throughout the different seasons?
I mean, during the summer we have a lot of migrants arriving here from Africa, so you have your swallows, you have your sand martins, also we get common terns that nest on the rafts that we put out in the middle of the ponds. During the winter we have a lot of migrant birds coming over from Siberia and Scandinavia, so you'll have a beautiful duck called a smew, lovely black and white duck, and you'll have goldeneye, which are quite an interesting duck because they actually nest in trees rather than on the ground like most waterfowl. We also, during the winter time, get wonderful murmurations of starlings. At any time we might have 10,000 starlings whirling around the visitor centre and above the reed beds before they drop down to roost for the night. It's quite a fantastic spectacle.
Now this is a visitor centre. Do people have to be serious bird watchers to come here?
No, I mean we do get a lot of bird watchers and people who like taking wildlife photography as well. But anybody can come and visit. It's a lovely day out. We've got a little gift shop and facilities for people to sit peacefully and watch the birds. And also there's lots of different educational things and fun things you can get involved in. From school visits, coming along and doing some family fun activities during the summer holidays. We have a lot of volunteers getting involved as well. So the centre shop here, the little gift shop, is manned by volunteers. Also people get involved by coming to work with the nature reserve manager to help manage the site. It's a great way to keep fit, great way to be sociable, and also to help Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust manage such a fantastic nature reserve.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's been really fascinating. I have to admit I've never actually been here and I live locally, but it certainly won't be the last time I come, so thanks very much for showing us around.
Thank you for visiting.
And I've got a feeling that this sort of local discovery will form part of the theme throughout the series. Many people travel for miles to get to these places, and there's gems like this right on the doorstep.
The River Humber starts where the River Ouse and Trent meet in the west and runs east nearly 40 miles before coming to the North Sea. From the North Sea back to the estuary, I'm paying a visit to an exciting project which has not only prevented thousands of homes from flooding, but also created a natural habitat for the estuary's wildlife. I've come to a spot called Julian's Bower. This is an amazing turf maze that was cut out in the 12th century by monks. There's absolutely stunning views which clearly show where the Ouse and the Trent meet the Humber. In 2006, 450 hectares of farmland became a realignment site. I'm here with Tom James, ABP's Environmental Manager, who's here to tell us a bit more. Tom, we associate ABP with the docks around the Humber. Can you tell us how ABP is involved with this piece of land?
In terms of land ownership, one of the results of being, a fairly long-established organisation with statutory roles and responsibilities that go back into time, we do own various sort of patches of land throughout the Humber that you wouldn't perhaps immediately associate with our port activities. And it so happens that an area of land here at the Alkborough Flats Managed Realignment Site was just one of those examples. An estuary is an incredibly complex natural environment, and activities on an estuary can affect it in many different ways, in chemical, biological and physical ways that can alter the way the water works, the way the morphology of the bed of the estuary, the riverbed actually works, the way that sediment is distributed throughout the estuary. And it's important for us to take these things into account.
So what is realignment?
Essentially, when you are looking to try and replicate, to try and increase estuarine habitat in the context of an estuary, it entails finding normally a piece of agricultural land that's relatively low-lying, and you essentially build a new flood wall behind the site, a new flood defence behind your sort of denoted managed realignment site, and then you create a breach in the old seawall, and thereby allowing the flood tide to naturally infill the site. It effectively becomes a tidal basin, and exit the site also on the ebb tide. And through a repeated process of flood and ebb tides, transporting sediment into and out of the site, that sediment gradually accretes actually within the managed realignment site, thereby replicating the different types of habitats, the mosaic of habitats that we find within the estuary.
What kind of habitats have been introduced from the realignment?
It can vary from mudflats, just basically something that probably, to the naked eye looks a bit kind of brown and boring really. Mudflat represents a fantastic feeding resource for various insects and benthic invertebrates that actually dwell in that mud itself. And that habitat can also vary depending on how far you go up in the tidal cycle. So there are areas perhaps that aren't inundated on every single tide, only slightly inundated. Those will be areas that we would characterise as salt marsh. But that in itself is a very wide definition and can encompass all sorts of different types of plants. And that in itself also represents a valuable habitat for birds.
So what kind of things can people see here?
So at Alkborough we can see a variety of different habitats that range from mudflats, just plain mudflats, to different types of salt marsh, to intertidal reed beds as well. The inner estuary is often characterised by quite large amounts of reed beds, and each of those habitats has essentially a food chain attached to those, and a different sort of characteristics from the point of view of estuarine ecology attached to those sorts of habitats. But Alkborough in particular, it is the largest managed realignment site in Europe. It's a pretty special location, and there are some very fine examples of the different types of wildlife that we find in this part of the estuary. In particular, the bird life actually is absolutely exceptional at Alkborough. There's an awful lot of particularly waders and wildfowl, and the various specialised species that are protected under European law that make annual migrations north and south from this part of the Humber. They're very well represented at Alkborough.
Well, it really is a beautiful spot here, and thanks very much for meeting me, Tom.
Thank you very much, it's been a pleasure.
In common with Far Rings, by the late 19th century, Water's Edge was part of 15 tile, brick and cement yards, all of which use local clay. By the early 20th century, a lot of the supplies had run out and many of the yards had to be abandoned.
It's amazing to think that these old clay pits support habitat for over 230 species of wildflower, 50 nesting bird species, and a wealth of invertebrates, including over 250 species of moths. It's visitor centres like these that are not only good for education, but just a great day out.
Well, that's all from us from sunny Barton. Until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.